Hey everyone, today we're going to cover chord symbols for 7th chords, the reasons for proper notation practices, chord inversions for triads and 7th chords, octave displacement, and the root position as well as the first, second, and third inversions. Here we go! Chord symbols are also used for 7th chords. There are several different chord symbols for each kind of 7th chord, and you must be able to recognize each of them. All of these examples use the note C as the root of the chord. To use a particular chord symbol on a different root, you simply change the note C to whatever the note name is of the root of the desired chord. Memorize these before moving on. This is a rarely seen way of notating a major 7th chord. Notice the slash through the 7th. This is different than a dominant 7th, which has a letter and a number only. Notice there is no slash through the 7. And here are the chord symbols for the additional 7th chords I mentioned in the last episode. Looking at these chord symbols, you will note the use of a lowercase m as well as an uppercase m directly after the root. The choice of whether a lowercase or uppercase m is used after the root in notating a 7th chord is determined solely by the kind of triad a chord has. A lowercase m after the root means the 7th chord contains a minor triad. An uppercase m after the root means the 7th chord contains a major triad. Additionally, a plus sign directly after the root indicates the 7th chord contains an augmented triad, while a small 0 directly after the root means the 7th chord contains a diminished triad. It should also be obvious that capital M, MAJ, MA, or the triangle symbol stand for major and are synonymous. Lowercase m, MIN, MI, or the slash symbol stand for minor and are synonymous. The plus symbol, or aug, stand for augmented and are synonymous. And the small 0 or dim stand for diminished and are synonymous. I'd like to emphasize how important it is to use correct procedure when writing triads or 7th chords. Triads and 7th chords are created from intervals that have a specific interval number. Triads are built with a root, 3rd, and 5th, while 7th chords are built with a root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. It is therefore important to determine the correct interval numbers for each chord factor if you want to write a triad or 7th chord correctly. To illustrate this, let's revisit the B augmented 7th chord. Notice the B augmented triad contains the notes B, D sharp, and F double sharp. Also notice that F double sharp and G are enharmonic notes. Although F double sharp could also have been written as G, this would be incorrect since B to G has an interval number of a 6th. Observe how different these two look from a visual standpoint. The 1, 3, 5, 7 construction is easily recognized as a 7th chord in the bar on the left since these chord factors are on adjacent spaces. The rightmost bar is visually confusing as the intervals are 1, 3, 6, not 5, and 7. Perhaps the best reason for developing proper notation practices is that a sight-reading musician will be able to recognize the chord on the left faster than the chord on the right. This is because the majority of written music follows proper notation practices, and the sight-reading musician will therefore be more familiar with the visual look of the chords on the staff and subsequently recognize them quicker. The same is true of scales and key signatures. Take a look at this example. The correctly written C-sharp major scale on the right will be identified quicker by the sight-reading musician, while the incorrectly written C-sharp major scale on the left might cause a sight-reading musician to pause for a second to figure it out. There are other reasons for writing scales correctly, however. Although both examples sound the same, notice the correctly written C-sharp major scale on the right only requires sharps, while the incorrectly written C-sharp major scale on the left contains sharps and naturals. As I stated back in episode 12, key signatures are created from the major and minor scales. What would happen if we created key signatures derived from both the incorrect and correct notation of the C-sharp major scale? Let's find out. Take a look at this. Notice that the key signature created from the incorrectly written C-sharp major scale is not as clean looking as the key signature created from the correctly written C-sharp major scale. Clarity without clutter is important in notation practices. But let's carry this out a little further. What if we place two notes on the staff in each example? Let's try this. The problems with incorrect notation procedures now become evident. Both the C and the F will create confusion in the incorrectly written C-sharp major key signature. Is it a C-sharp or a C natural, or an F-sharp or an F natural? The incorrectly written C-sharp major scale in this instance was written with an F natural rather than an E sharp, as well as a C natural rather than a B sharp. These enharmonic spellings break the alternating line space or space line construction for a major scale, resulting in two notes on a space, C natural and C sharp, as well as two notes on a line, F natural and F sharp. Therefore, any key signature created from this incorrect scale construction will create issues. By being careful with your notation practices, you will avoid problems like these. Chord inversions are alternative ways of organizing the available notes or chord factors of a particular chord through octave displacement. Octave displacement is simply moving a note to a different octave. Looking at the notes in a typical B-flat major triad, for example, we see the notes arranged in this fashion. This particular arrangement is known as root position. Root position is the designation of the inversion when the root of the chord is the lowest note. Now let's take this root and transpose it up one octave, leaving the third and fifth where they are. This inversion is known as first inversion. First inversion is the designation of the inversion when the third of the chord is the lowest note. Finally, let's take the lowest note of this chord, the third, and transpose it up one octave, leaving the fifth and the transposed root where they are. This inversion is known as second inversion. Second inversion is the designation of the inversion when the fifth of the chord is the lowest note. Now what would happen if you were to take the lowest note of this chord, the fifth, and transpose it up one octave? You would simply get the root position again, just up one octave from before. It is for this reason there are only three inversions for triads: root position, first inversion, and second inversion. Seventh chords have inversions as well. Let's look at E-flat minor 7th as an example. Here is the chord in root position. If we take the root and transpose it up one octave, leaving the third, fifth, and seventh where they are, we get first inversion. Notice that the third is now the lowest note. If we now take the third, the lowest note, and transpose it up one octave, leaving the other notes where they are, we get second inversion. Notice that the fifth is now the lowest note. Taking the fifth and transposing it up one octave at this point yields the third inversion. Notice that the seventh is now the lowest note. All of this can be summed up in this table. Obviously, triads will not have a third inversion since they do not contain a seventh as a chord factor. These are the inversions in their strictest interpretation. In actual practice, it is not unusual to see the various chord factors arranged in any fashion so long as the rules in this table are observed. Namely, that the type of inversion is defined by which chord factor is the lowest note. The chord factors above the lowest note may be flipped, transposed, or even doubled up one or more octaves as in the following examples. The central point to remember is that the lowest note or chord factor in any octave of the chord determines the inversion. For example, if a chord is in second inversion, the fifth of the chord must be the lowest note. It doesn't matter what octave the other chord factors are in, as long as the lowest note is the fifth. This section lists the major, dominant, minor, half diminished, fully diminished, augmented, and major minor seventh chord inversions available in their simplest and strictest interpretation. The correct right-hand fingerings on piano are listed to the left of each chord. Be sure to play the root of each chord in your left hand on the low register of the piano while playing these chords in your right hand to get a feel for the sound of each chord. The major, minor, diminished, and augmented triads are contained within the major seventh, minor seventh, fully diminished seventh, and augmented seventh chords respectively. With the exception of the third inversion, since there is no third inversion for a triad, simply remove the seventh from the seventh chord inversions listed here to get the inversions for the major, minor, diminished, and augmented triads. The first, second, and third inversions are presented here while the root positions for each seventh chord have been listed in episode 21. Some chords have been transposed an octave lower to avoid excessive ledger lines. Become fluent with these inversions before moving on to the next section. Here are the major seventh chords in first inversion. These are the major seventh chords in second inversion. This is what the major seventh chords in third inversion sounds like. Here's the dominant seventh chords in first inversion. These are the dominant 7th chords in second inversion. Here are the third inversion dominant 7th chords. The following is the first inversion minor 7th chords. These are the second inversion minor 7th chords. Here are the third inversion minor 7th chords. Here's the first inversion of the half diminished 7th chords. These are the second inversions of the half diminished 7th chords. And finally, the third inversion of the half diminished 7th chords. Here's the first inversion of the fully diminished 7th chords. Here's the second inversion of the fully diminished 7th chords. And finally, the third inversion of the fully diminished 7th chords. Here's the first inversion of the augmented 7th chords. This is the second inversion of the augmented 7th chords. And finally, the third inversion of the augmented 7th chords. This is the first inversion of the minor major 7th chords. This is the second inversion of the minor major 7th chords. And to finish up, the third inversion of the minor major 7th chords. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like and leave a comment below if you have any questions. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you like the music you've been listening to, please be sure to check out my friend Bill Fulton's album Time at this link.